Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope all of you are excited for today's session.
Okay, hello everybody. It's really exciting to be able to talk to you about my most favorite subject in the world, which is ecology. And I'll just start. There might be like a momentary delay in let the slide change. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this is just a picture of seeing the world through a lens. And every scientist that you've probably heard from so far sees the world through a like slightly different lens. Like for example, a physicist might look at this picture and say, maybe what are the water dynamics? How is the water going up such a tall tree? Or look at the wind. How is the branch structure withstanding high winds? Maybe a biologist would say, wow, what is this tree species or something like that. And so similarly, as an ecologist, I feel like my lens is to see the world as a giant sum of ecosystems. And so probably if you guys go on to choose a science to specialize in, that will become your lens. But that just goes to say that we are all looking finally at the same world. And finally, together, like all these lenses and viewpoints have to come together to form a complete picture of our world. And especially when different kinds of scientists collaborate, amazing things can happen. So never feel like you're like everybody who talks to you is just a piece of the puzzle, but you're the person who will put that puzzle together and form your own unique worldview. So I just wanted to start out with that. And now I'll tell you about how the whole world is actually just ecology. So basically, does anybody have like any previous schooling on what ecology is or any understanding of what ecology means to you? Here's like a very standard definition, but anything else you guys want to share, please let me know.
Okay, Abhishmat said he's not heard of ecology before.
Okay.
Lots of nopes.
Okay, that's great. You're a clean slate, so we can discuss anything we like. Okay, I see one have heard, so that's exciting. So basically, I'll just give you like a general idea. Okay, so ecology can be summed down very basically into a study of ecosystems. And what is an ecosystem? You can look at an ecosystem as any group of organisms and their surroundings and how together they form like a complete picture. And so, for example, just take your family as a very simple example of an ecosystem. You are a part of your ecosystem, your parents are a part of your ecosystem, then whatever food you bring in from the market, kind of whoever brings the food is a part of your ecosystem, because food is really important. Believe it or not, toilets are a very important part of our ecosystem, because as we eat we produce waste, and it's very important to safely deal with that waste. Our water supply system is a part of our ecosystem. These are where we're getting all our essential nutrients from. And as humans, we have certain other requirements too. Your teachers will be part of your ecosystem, because that's where you're learning from. You're developing your minds. Your friends are a part of your ecosystem, because you're interacting daily and learning from each other. So basically, everything you interact with, or a whole group of interconnected, interacting organisms, can form an ecosystem. So if you look at the very scientific definition, ecology is the study of organisms and the environment, which is basically something living and all the non-living components, and together how they form a system. And the reason that ecology is so important to study is because you can't study you can, but it makes more sense to study any living being or any non-living being in relation to all the entities that it's interacting with. So for example, if I want to look at just you and I said, oh, you seem to be a little sad today. Often there's something around you, something you've experienced, something connected to a bunch of other things that can be a cause of it. And therefore, like, almost nothing is in isolation. So understanding how different components fit together and then studying that as a whole is what ecology is. And I saw somebody said, then is ecology the study of everything? And personally, I will agree with you that everything can be it can be the study of everything. But traditionally, ecology is looked at this like as the study of a system. Like certain typical systems exist, like maybe a forest is a very classic example of an ecosystem. So if you are looking at a forest, you think about the various organisms, the various non-living things that come into it. And so here, if you see this little picture, that's like very simple, where an ecosystem is just a sum of all these parts. So some rainfall, some solar, like sunlight. Then an important part of an ecosystem is the disturbances it faces. Suppose in the forest, there's suddenly a forest fire, that will also be a part of the ecosystem. Plant community, animal community, water, soil, all of this together forms an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is basically, it depends on how you define it. Like you can say, okay, one potted plant in my balcony is how I'm going to define this ecosystem. But when you think about applying it, often in today's world, we're thinking, okay, there's a lot of deforestation happening. So how can we save forests? So that's when it's really useful to think of the forest as an ecosystem to understand how one change affects a lot of different organisms. You can perhaps say that the potted plant is at risk and look at that ecosystem as well. But a lot of times we look at usually naturally occurring ecosystems. So I'll give you an example on the next slide. It will just change in a second. Okay, so this is a very classic ecosystem. It is a pond. So a pond, if you think about it, is not a very large scale ecosystem. It's very small. But in ecosystem science, there are some particular orchids that grow in tropical forests that have like a cup-shaped opening, and that cup-shaped opening can be studied as an entire ecosystem with predators, prey, nutrient influx, nutrient outflux. If I'm using any words that you don't get, please feel free to ask. And so here we're just looking at a general ecosystem. Okay, so can you guys tell me some components that you see? There's a lot of them and they're all pretty obvious. So I'd love to hear what stands out to you.
So Chaiti, Jian says duck, fish.
Yes.
Frog, very good.
Yes.
Soil.
Oh, yes, very good. Awesome. Yes.
Ala says there are biotic and abiotic components.
All right, that's perfect. You are already scoring all the technical terminology points.
So water being flower, dragonfly.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Awesome. So I'm glad that you're noticing that. Oh, someone said air, and that's a really, really good thing to add. Pebbles, yes, perfect. Grass, yes. And can you guys tell me, do you think there is there sunlight? Is there moonlight? Do you feel like, what's the source of illumination? Someone said tigers, but
we let our imagination run wild a little bit.
I mean, they might be just outside, but right now we'll just look at this little intersection of pond. Yes, microorganisms, brilliant. Yes.
So what you can't see also, like plankton and diatom and
exactly, and the microorganisms that are in the air, microorganisms that are on the surface of the water, and as well as those that are inside. So guys, you're doing awesome, and that's a really good roundup of all the things that are there. So we'll talk about a little bit about how these different elements interact. So we know some basic things, like you see these little insects and snails inside the water. And we know that ducks, have you guys seen ducks like putting their little duck bills in and eating? And so that forms an important part of the food chain for ducks. Fish may eat the aquatic plants that we see. Fish may eat other smaller fish. Then you can see some mosquito larvae, some frog. I mean, you can imagine them as mosquito larvae. You can imagine them as like baby frogs. Those are also eaten by fish and ducks. And so basically, most things in this ecosystem are eating each other at some point. And if you can see, there's some things that like cross the barrier between water and air. For example, you will see there are some plants like this beautiful lotus type plant that has its roots in the soil at the bottom of the pond, but it has its flower up, and that flower is probably pollinated by one of these insects that's flying around. And often one of these insects may be eaten by some other organism that's close to the pond. So exactly, food chain. So that's a very integral part. So now, for example, this is a very beautiful and productive system. So it's productive for multiple reasons. Firstly, we can see that the main source of a lot of things that are growing in this pond is the soil, where the water plants are growing from. And they are growing with the help of sunlight and air and all the other cool things that you guys mentioned. And yes, I do personally love water striders because they're very interesting. And if you ever want to talk about them, contact me. But so we can see that all these organisms are interacting uniquely. It's not necessary that ducks are only eating one organism or fish are only eating one type of plant. We see many types of plants and many different kinds of alternative food sources. Like, for example, like it's not like if some kind of disease comes by which targets every single frog in the lake. Whatever organisms are surviving by eating the frogs will still be able to survive by eating something else. Any questions?
Yes, we do have a question from Pooja. Her question is, what is the difference between an ecosystem and a food chain?
Okay, that's a really good question. So one of the main differences between an ecosystem and a food chain is that here in an ecosystem, we consider all of the non-living components as well. In a food chain, the first thing that you'd start out with is a plant, which is considered a primary producer is the term that they use. And you usually take you'd consider first the plant, then whatever eats it next and whatever eats it next. But in an ecosystem, you would say, okay, the plant is getting its nutrients from the soil, like the basic building blocks. So you would consider a soil as a very important part of the ecosystem. You would consider the quality of sunlight, the duration of sunlight, whether it's a cloudy area, whether it's a well-lit area. All of that is really integral to an ecosystem. And in an ecosystem, you're not only interested in food relationships. Like, for example, in a food chain, you would say, okay, duck eats insects. But here you're interested in, okay, duck's excreta is forming fertilizer for another plant. And not like different interactions, like a lot of animals and plants have interactions that do not depend on food at all, like pollination or things like that. So that's like one of the main differences between an ecosystem and a food chain. But both are like equally important in understanding how a particular environment works.
Okay, we have another question from Anirudh.
Okay.
Anirudh's question is, in ecosystems, do we ask questions like if one component was not there, would it affect another component?
Yes, brilliant. That is exactly the type of question we want to ask, because a lot of times in today's world, components have been going missing as different climatic conditions and habitats and things like that happen. For example, if perhaps this was very close to a human village and someone started fishing and felt like they needed to support their family by fishing only from this pond. And eventually, because of excessive fishing, the fishes disappeared. Then it would cause problems in two ways. Like, one, there would be too many insects, and two, whatever is feeding on the fish, maybe some birds who pass by and feed on the fish would not have a food source. And gradually these small changes lead to a lot of large changes in the ecosystem. And this is similar to what we look at in a food chain. So in that way, but in ecology, especially when you're studying an ecosystem, you're always, so there is a concept of a steady state ecosystem. Okay, I'll just get into this on the next slide. Okay, any other questions on this so far?
No, I think we can move ahead.
Okay, awesome. So now we look at a very important distinction between a healthy ecosystem and a collapsed ecosystem. So if you guys see these pictures, even if you didn't know what it was, instinctively there are some changes that will stand out to you. Can you guys tell me any changes you see? Oh, okay, you guys have had a session on this, so
We did have so they should know a lot actually.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure you guys know like way more about coral reefs than me in that case, because I know just a bit about them. But can you tell me what are the big differences that you see between these two pictures? Yes, yes. Very good. Colorful. That's a really important change. Yes. Water difference. Yes, that's a really good one too. Yes. I love that one. Life and death. Yeah.
Yes. Ala says loss of biodiversity.
Okay, awesome. Awesome.
Colors, animals.
Yes, exactly. So we'll just go on the, basically, so on both of them, it's not that the one on the right is completely dead. It's just that you can't see any variety whatsoever. It just looks all the same. And at that point, when you think about an ecosystem, you think of a lot of interacting components and a lot of components that play different roles within the same area. But here it looks like there's just one single organism that is playing only one role. And that's the biggest difference between a healthy and a collapsed ecosystem. So this healthy ecosystem, you can see there's a bunch of organisms, there's a bunch of colors, there's a bunch of different areas that are being occupied in the image itself. And most importantly, you can see that there is balance. It doesn't look like any one species or any one type of organism is dominating this ecosystem. And that is one of the most important indicators of having a good ecosystem, is that there is always a steady state. So I forgot to mention in the last slide, but almost each ecosystem that you will ever study is unique. You will not find the same two ecosystems anywhere. They're all beautifully unique and they all have their own individual characteristics based on whatever particular rock they're on. Or it's just like people, no two are the same. But you'll find a lot of similar characteristics in places that have similar conditions. Like if you have two ponds, maybe 100 meters apart, similar soil, very similar climatic conditions, like they get the same amount of sunlight, same amount of rainfall, similar animals pass by, you'll notice a lot of them have similar final steady state ecosystems. And that's because when over time adaptation to a certain area, organisms find a healthy balance within the group. And in when you go up to like the microorganism level, like the amount of collaboration is amazing. Like you'll find some organisms that produce proteins that almost carry the rest of the organisms. And it's not like well, one important thing to know is it's not like they're doing this out of the goodness of their hearts or benevolence of nature or anything like that. I mean, you're all scientists, you'll know that basically nature just is, it develops to the best of every individual organism's benefit. So
certainly. So Chaiti, I think we'll move on a little because we have to
yes.
finish by 6.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So just
Sorry.
keep that in mind. No issues.
Thank you.
No issues. No issues.
Yes.
We also want to take some questions in the end. So that's
Okay,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, we want to remember that a healthy ecosystem is balanced, it's diverse, and because of its diversity, it's resilient. If one link goes away, you always have another link that's joining. So awesome. If you have any questions, we'll take them at the end, but I think everyone is good right now. Okay, so now we will get into basically leading up to what we want to talk about mainly today is ecosystems and climate change. So climate change is extremely, so I'm sure you all know about climate change. And have you had a session on this in the past?
No, not directly. No.
Okay. So I'm sure you also learned about it in school, but I'll just generally recap that because of greenhouse gases that are increasing in our atmosphere, like carbon dioxide is a good example of one of them. We have a lot of overall sudden changes that we are experiencing in our climate. Sudden from like a geological time scale. So from for our immediate experience, it may mean changes over 5 years, over 10 years, but in the grand scale of human history, they are very dramatic because we've had pretty steady temperatures so far. So some of the very important changes are changes in extreme weather. So you will notice a lot more very hot days, a lot more extremely rainy days, a sudden flooding. Like you'll have maybe 10 days of like lots of rainfall and then no rainfall at all, as opposed to general spread, gentle climate. We'll observe general warming of temperature, which is leading to a lot of bigger changes in places that are colder than us, like for example where there's a lot of snow in the poles, there is a lot of melting of the snow, which is again leading to warmer oceans. And oceans themselves are a big reservoir of carbon dioxide, so it's also leading to more acidification of the ocean and a lot of different things. But for us right now, we'll just remember that basically climate change is causing a lot of extreme temperature. So, can you think about changes in climate and temperature, why they would be bad for ecosystems? And there's a hint here on this slide.
So why would this be bad? If, what I mean, it could like dry the soil. What else do you think could happen? Okay, smoke.
Smoke from buildings. That's actually a really good point you make, because a lot of ecosystem, like a lot of plants suffer from smoke damage, which like fundamentally hurts them. Yes, definitely animals can die, especially animals that are very sensitive to changes in temperature. Like frogs, if the water warms beyond a certain point, they will die. Yes, perfect.
So pollution, wildfires.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, sure.
Wildfires are very damaging. And the biggest point is for, yes, Earth going down. Yes. But a big point is that for humans, if the temperature gets really bad, you might have heard that a lot of coastal cities are predicted to drown. So for us, it's not a problem. We just get up and leave, you know?
Yes.
We can move, but plants cannot change the location. Plants are always, they are completely adapted over thousands of years to perfectly thrive in that particular area. And if suddenly, so plants have very good capacity to adapt to change just over a long time. And the biggest problem with climate change is that there's no time interval for plants and animals to adapt to these new changes. And that's why they are simply wiped out. Like if there is extreme heat, plants cannot survive it. They will just die. They burn down in wildfires. Exactly, yes. There is no time to deal with it. So that is the biggest problem. So
we can move on a little, Chaiti. We can move on.
For us, the idea is that we want to proactively stop this. So briefly, if any of you are interested in pursuing pure ecological research, there are a lot of options you can study in the lab. So basically all these baseline studies where you say, okay, how is this plant going to respond to 10 degrees increased temperature, like this person is doing? You grow your plants underneath the light and see, okay, I wonder how they will respond. And another type of research you can do is a field research, where you actually go out into an ecosystem and you study the existing conditions to know how it works when everything is working perfect. So here is a picture of me in the Peruvian Amazonian rainforest. It was a very magical experience being in complete untouched rainforest, where there were maybe like 8 to 9 species of mosquitoes following you everywhere you went. I have never seen so many spiders in my life. They were beautiful spiders. So my study was on social spiders, which are spiders that live together, like they form giant webs of like, maybe 30 to 40 spiders together, and they fight a lot. So basically we would spend 4 hours a day just watching the colony and noting if a large female fought a small female and things like that. So the one in the picture is a large female, but I'm sorry if you're afraid of spiders, but we can talk about this more at the end. And so that is an example of traditional ecology, where you either are studying a pristine ecosystem or you're taking elements of an ecosystem and studying them in a lab. But we'll come to a really important part of like ecology, which is applied ecology. And here is where we're going to talk about more of science in a career that is apart from science in academics and writing research papers. So especially with ecology, and especially now when we're facing so many issues with climate change, there's a lot of value in applying this ecosystem knowledge to practical places around us. So for example, do you guys see this cute little flower garden here? It is an example of a pollinator garden. Has anyone heard of a pollinator garden?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so as someone's heard of it. So basically, I'll just summarize that as we use more and more pesticides and have more agriculture and more of like natural wild flowers and wild land is brought down, bees and butterflies and other insects have lost their habitat, and so if there's no habitat, they can't survive. So we're actually in quite a significant global crisis of bees right now, and bees are responsible for the pollination of many, not only agricultural crops, but also natural crops. So this is a really smart system of giving, like within our urban areas, still giving bees and butterflies a small place of home, a place where they can get food, a place where they can make their habitat and have more young. And
So
so
kind
that's
of like
why
a sustainable ecosystem in your backyard
flowers
or
can
garden.
exactly it can have a huge impact, because such a small place, such a small, like a tiny garden, this garden won't be more than maybe a meter by a meter across. It can support a very large number of
Yeah.
birds, bees and butterflies. And once you support bees and butterflies, you also have birds coming, and you have different types of pollinators coming. So it's a really easy fix to a really big problem that we have. And so that's a really beautiful example of applied ecology, where you're taking what you're learning from existing, all the studies of pristine places, and applying it here. So similarly on this other side, and if anyone is interested in native pollinator gardens, I can give you some links also at the end. I think there is one in Alibag where they have made a lot of they've saved a lot of things. So another one here is a river restoration project. So I don't know, if any of you are based in Pune, or most of you are. So we have, even in our Mula River and Mutha River, there are small projects where citizens who may not be like traditional scientists are trying to use ecological principles to restore rivers and river ecosystems. So here is like a proper big scale restoration project in England, where using correct river vegetation and creating little barriers to the stream and little niches and nooks and crannies in the river suddenly led to an explosion in the amount of wild fishes and insects and everything that can be supported by this river itself. And if you look at the two pictures side by side, you can see that where there once was just little cut rock on this end, you can see how suddenly vegetation is exploding. And rivers, like on a side note, have very unique ecology and unique ecosystems that are not found really anywhere else. So it's really important for us to preserve these ecosystems, because this in the end is often where we get our drinking water from, and
Sure.
having clean and pure drinking water is very important. So in these ways, we're saving different habitats, but we're also helping ourselves because we're so dependent on these things. All right, next we'll go to, so coming to the main point is how can we use ecology in agriculture, which is a very it's something that matters to all of us, even if we don't know about it. And basically, I just want to take a moment to check in how everybody knows about agriculture, food, production of food systems. Yes. Has
Yes, I
anyone
would think
seen a
so.
farm?
Yes, maybe if you've seen a farm, we can just say yes. I think yes. Most of us have seen farms. Yes,
Okay,
many are
awesome.
saying yes.
Good,
Growing
excellent,
crops.
excellent. So I'll just really quickly say that when you grow any crop is always a plant, and unless you are growing like cows, and that's not called a crop, that's called livestock. So that's a whole different system. Today we'll just look at crops, and so the key important things are these five things, which are very basic, very simple. You need soil, number one. Soil here, I mean, we think of it as just soil, but it is the source of all nutrients. Like all the building blocks come from soil. Then we need air, carbon dioxide. This is available in plenty. We only have to, worry about it when it's too polluted. We need light, sunlight. That's where the main energy capture process comes from. We need space, good space. Otherwise, if plants are really cramped, they don't grow well. And also, very importantly, we need water. And all these elements together contribute to the growth of the plant. Then, the different parts of the plant. And I've only put them up here because we eat all different kinds of the plants. Ginger is a root. Then most of the green leafy vegetables we are eating the stem and the leaf. Then for all the fruits we eat, and tomatoes and cucumbers, we are eating the fruit of the plant. And even in the case of the grains we eat, like rice, wheat, all of this is also technically the fruit of the plant. So generally, we choose plants that have the ability to focus a lot of their growth into the fruit so that we quickly harvest it later. And a lot of times this comes at certain consequences to the plant. Like, for example, maybe the plant doesn't spend so much energy in building a strong stem and leaves, but it devotes most of that energy to making plants. So wild plants and crop plants are very different. Crop plants have been selected over ages and ages by humans, and therefore they have some differences. So now when you think of crop plants, basically, you think of, say, wheat, or here in this example, we think of potato. Okay, you guys know which part of the potato is, which part of the plant potato is?
Potato is the underground part.
Yes, correct. And it is the stem. Yes, very good, guys. Amazing. Very smart. But yes, so potato is the stem, and it's a unique plant. And so here you'll notice in potato, you don't get a lot of growth above the ground. Most of the magic is happening underground. But if you look at this, and then you remember a picture of an ecosystem of a pond, can you guys think of any differences and tell me?
I mean, we don't see like water in a pond, but they are
Right.
probably irrigated for sure, these farms.
Correct. And just thinking of it like on the basic three ideas of like diversity, and resilience and balance. Do you see like any of these?
Yes. Okay. So Athant says there's no diversity. There's
Exactly.
only one
Perfect.
plant.
Yes, exactly. And interestingly, someone said no ducks, but there is a very strong campaign to bring ducks into agricultural fields as an essential part.
Okay.
So that's also a great change. Yeah, I know. So yes, exactly, guys. So basically, it is not at all a diverse system. And in the end, we are growing plants after all. So the biggest advantage of this system is productivity. Like every year, you'll have an amazing harvest of potatoes, right? But eventually all those potatoes have over the years been sucking all the nutrients out of the soil. And we know that when there's only one type of organism, that's not at all a balanced ecosystem. So in order for all the different kinds of agricultural processes we follow are in the end unsustainable, because every year you redisturb the entire system, remove everything you planted, turn the soil. So turning the soil is thought to be good for agriculture, but for all microorganisms and soil sediment structure, it's incredibly bad, because like you are basically all the microorganisms that have accumulated and formed their own micro ecosystems within the soil, they're just destroyed every time. And microorganisms are essential to plant growth. You cannot grow plants without them. They are in the roots, in the soil, everywhere. And another thing we'll see here that we don't see in any healthy ecosystem is exposed soil. So I don't know if you guys have ever taken a nice walk in a forest, but you'll notice that even if there are trees surrounding you, the ground is never bare. There's always fallen leaves, little twigs. You'll see a lot of different things. And so that's really important, because in a natural steady state ecosystem, you'll never have bare soil. And so that's another really important part of the disadvantages of growing farms like this. Okay, any questions? I see some activity on the chat.
No, just really comments, but all good. We can move on. Yeah.
Awesome. So next, we'll just briefly look at climate change and farming. So again, the same problem we talked about for climate change and ecosystems is exactly the same for climate change and farming. Plants can't go anywhere. Farmers cannot change the land that they already have. They can't say, okay, I don't like this land, there's not enough rain, I'm going to just move and get more land there. Usually it's ancestral land, people have been cultivating for generations and things like that. So the biggest problem is that plants are not developed to sustain the current temperatures that we are getting. They don't develop properly in heat. Sometimes the entire reproductive system of the plant does not develop in high heat, which is a huge problem, because mostly we are eating the fruits of the plant, which is the reproductive system of the plant. So this is like very bad. Then even an increase in drought and flood. So you'd think that flooding is good for plants because there's a lot of water, but actually flooding and drought are almost always equally bad for any agricultural crop, because in flooding the roots don't receive any oxygen. They are completely choked and they all just die out with fungal diseases. Same with drought, they don't get enough water, so they wilt and die. And every time we think of dying plants, this is like the entire year's livelihood for a farmer. So it's completely gone. There's already a lot of most farmers don't want their children to become farmers. It's already like a big problem where the number of farmers globally are reducing, and otherwise we won't have any food. So that's like, it's a really big problem. So if you young minds have like some, great ideas in the future, just devote your minds so that you can one day save us all. But
Chaiti, we can move on a little bit, because it's 20 minutes left. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So basically, plant physiology affected, nutrients affected, and plant health is affected. And all of this causes damage, economic loss, and full ecosystem loss. But we know that if we have a steady state ecosystem, if they have a higher ability to cope. So this is here an example of an ecosystem based farm. And already, can you tell me what are some differences that you see between the last picture and this one?
That's really nice. This is a really nice comparison. Yeah, Athansh says diversity in plants.
Exactly. Poles, yes. Yeah, so you can already see different heights of plants, which is a really, which is something that already takes you to the mind, puts you in mind of a forest, because you always have various things growing at different levels. Then can you see there's no exposed soil? There's a lot of dried hay that's applied over all the exposed soil. Yes, covered soil. Perfect. Yes. And can you see that even in a tiny row, there are 3 to 4 different crops that are growing. And that is really important, because every crop is taking something different out of the soil. And so they're not putting that same one type of load on the soil. They're all putting a slightly different load, which sometimes may benefit, and they all might grow better because of that. And you can see like a lot of no plants are in excess together. And that is a really key point. So here, this is like, very idealistic. Like in a lot of people cannot go directly into this kind of an ecological farm, because you don't get the same kind of commercial outputs. like in that potato farm we saw, it was all potatoes, right? Here you'll just get a lot of smaller amounts of different things, but in the long term it is a steadier ecosystem, and you put less work into it, less inputs and things like that. So this is the dream. Okay, so now to get there, there's a lot of work that we have to do. So there's two types of works that we have to do. The first one is research. Basically, crop plants are also plants. Just the way those ecologists were studying in that lab picture, they were studying the a small like tropical plant and seeing how they'll change in temperature. Same way, we need to study very well all our crop plants and the different things that they have ecosystems with. So I'll share one research experience that I've had in the last 2 years ago, and it was in a viticulture lab. So you guys have of course heard of wine, I think, and
Yes, I think so. Maybe.
yes.
I don't want to get into details.
Yes, the science of wine grapes or is called viticulture. So in California specifically, and you guys have probably heard of California, it's on the western coast of the United States, and here's a little red dot for the particular vineyard that I was working in. And this is how the grapes are grown. They're grown in like very narrow rows of grape plants, and they are usually across hillsides. And earlier California was the perfect place to grow grapes, and it was very good climate. But in the recent years, since climate change has taken place, California has seen an extreme change. So there is a high amount of drought to the point where they are worried about their drinking water every year. There are heat waves where it gets so hot. So a heat wave is considered 3 days or more of 40 degrees Celsius, which is not such a big deal to us here. But over there, where it is very, very rare, it is a very big deal because the people and the crops, none are adapted. And grapevines actually come from, they are very well adapted to the cold North American climate. And so in terms of wildfires, so I was in the field one year, and we experienced wildfires very close to us. And despite the field itself not being affected by the wildfires, all the berries that year were unusable because of smoke taint, which is where even atmospheric smoke combines with the compounds in the grapes and creates a horrible taste. So like even if the plant is not physically affected, all these environmental conditions are really, really bad. So grape growers are extremely worried in California. And when grape growers are worried, they give you lots of money to research grapes. So then here our experiment was such. So this is how a lot of these climate change and agriculture related experiments are set up. So first, you always want to start with understanding what is exactly happening. So in heat waves and in drought conditions, our question was, we want to understand what's happening before we start to work on what we can do. So the goal, our questions we asked were, how do leaves respond to increasing temperature? How does the timing of grape development change? Maybe the grapes are becoming ripe in fall instead of end fall, like early fall, and that's throwing off all the timelines and everything. And they're not developing the right compounds because it's too early. Then how does the sugar content of the grapes change? This is very important because it affects how the wine is made. And another thing that plays a role in this is carbon dioxide. The more carbon dioxide you have in the atmosphere, the more sugar content you get in all plant tissues. So that's also something we were studying. We were taking the temperature of grapes with little thermocouples inserted into individual grapes to see how the grape temperature changed with the heat itself. And the final question was, how do all these changes affect the final product, which is the wine itself? And so here are so this is actually what I did for an entire summer. In 40 degrees, we would go and measure individual plant values. And this is actually a very hi-fi machine called a Lycor, which is able to calculate the carbon dioxide intake and outtake of a like output of a leaf and subtract them to find the net value of photosynthesis. And very fancy, and it can measure a lot of very interesting things. So if you're interested in talking more about that, contact me. But here is basically the main questions we wanted to answer, things we wanted to do was, we said, okay, are there any native like wild grape species that we can like breed with our existing grape species that might be more tolerant to drought and more tolerant to heat? So the answer we found was that yes, several native species that we studied do have salt and drought tolerance. And for grapes, what happens is usually the root of the plant is something else, like the root and stem, and then you graft the variety onto the top so that you get like delicious wine grapes, and then the bottom is more like a standard bacteria resistant, fungus resistant, something like that. So yes, there is an answer. We have found a lot of cool native species that can tolerate and have good disease resistance, but a lot of development is needed. So this is like that first step. So now you've identified what can happen, and then you go ahead. If anyone's interested, one of the very important species is called Vitis riparia. And then another thing is finding helpful soil bacteria. So the project I was working on, this is still in progress, because sometimes the way people spray fertilizer nowadays, you spray bacteria so that you can improve the nitrogen content of the soil. Then another important thing we saw was calculating a healthy watering schedule. So when there's a heat wave, usually the farmers or vineyard owners' response is to just dump water. Like they were pouring 4 times, 3 times, 5 times the regular amount. And this actually has a negative effect again, because it leads to flooding. Like two extremes, going through way too much heat and way too much flooding is bad. So we did a measured experiment where we found that 1x the required amount, those blocks did badly. 3 times the required amount, recommended amount, those blocks also did badly, but the block that had 2 times the recommended amount did the best. And like across the board, like it had good photosynthesis, it had good what is called like the mesophil conductance. Never mind. So those things are like, they're just all indexes of plant health, and basically it had those good things. So that's a really good outcome of the experiment. We also want to find complementary plants to grow to make it more of like a varied landscape, because like you saw in those pictures, it's all kind of straight lines. So this is from another lab in a close by university, and they've had successful trials growing buckwheat, so between the rows, and also having just hedges, like simple hedges, and growing them across. And this has also had a really good effect on plants. And then finally, another idea is for all the increasing pests and diseases, cultivation of beneficial insects. And so this is also kind of in progress. So this is just a picture of my grape plants, so young, so innocent. And we used to do all kinds of horrible things to them, like leave them without water, without salty water and all kinds of things. But they were very resilient. And these are all native grape species. So their berries taste terrible, and they're very small and very sour. But they provide that base that all the rest of the wine industry is resting on. So this is just a picture. So that was an example of research for improving the ecosystem of an agricultural crop. So does anyone have any questions?
I think Ala and others are quite fascinated at the amount of science that it takes to be able to build this ecosystem. Sorry, there's some construction in the neighboring building, Chaiti.
No worries.
But really, so Anirudh asked, did you drink the wine in the end?
Okay, so the sad thing that happened was because basically our lab itself was next to the enology department, which is where they experiment with making wine. And so for 6 months straight, I smelled all the rotting berries that they would throw in a big container next to our lab. So I can never drink wine again.
Oh, Chaiti.
No,
That's we'll call it an occupational hazard.
it just smells so bad to me. My God, yeah, I can't. Yeah,
All right.
so
Well, you're in the same category as our young minds because they also can't drink wine yet. So we are all good. Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
we can
So
move on.
basically,
Yeah.
that's a research related to ecology, and believe me, like just general agricultural research, like the amount of research that goes into producing any seed variety of a general crop is also insane. Like a lot of hurdles to jump through. And then, so now we'll come to the other part, which is the fun part that I'm most interested in and now have gotten into, which is applying this research. So it's all very good to make or get all this research and write a bunch of papers and publish the papers and things like that. But there is a sad lack of linkage to from that research to actual farmers in, say, in a country like India, where a lot of farmers are completely dependent on their land and have no other way of earning any money. So how do we translate all this research that we've gained into actual practices in the field? And so that is again another field of applied ecology, and here it's called applied agroecology. And so in this is a project I'm working with right now, but if you guys are interested in more examples of how ecology is applied, please let me know. I can send you a lot of links. And basically we are working with cotton farmers. So I don't know if you guys know Yavatmal. It is
So our participants are all over India, but Yavatmal is rural Maharashtra, right?
exactly,
Yes.
so
Okay.
it's in the eastern side of Maharashtra, and it's just a district. There are lots of villages that grow cotton, and like huge amounts of cotton, like a very very large percentage of global cotton is supplied by India, and in India a large part of that cotton is supplied from Maharashtra and the areas surrounding Yavatmal. So there's a lot of cotton cultivation, and cotton is again a very exhaustive crop. Every time you grow it, it takes a lot of nutrients out of the soil. So usually people who cultivate it are putting in a lot of fertilizer, a lot of pesticide, and a lot of manual effort generally. And at present, because of very changed rainfall patterns and rainfall at the wrong time, that is causing a lot of damage and a lot of loss to cotton farmers. I don't know if you've heard it. This is like a serious topic, but Yavatmal
Yes.
is considered the farmer suicide capital of India. Like
Yes.
it's a very unfortunate situation. So there are a lot of funders who are interested, and all the companies that we buy our clothes from are usually customers, like long end customers of this cotton that is produced here. So it's really important for all of us because it is a big part of the clothes that we wear. So especially for cotton, there's been a lot of research that has found that a lot of sustainable practices are available to make this a friendlier ecosystem and a more sustainable ecosystem for the soil. So my organization that I work for right now, that's what we are focused on. So just to give you an overview, some of the very basic, simplest practices that you can do are growing rows of other crops between cotton. So I don't know, can you guys see my mouse right now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so if you guys see this row,
Yeah.
this is a cotton plant. So here in this like demonstration field, every 2 rows of cotton have been interspersed with 1 row of tur.
Tur dal.
Yeah,
Okay.
tur dal. And they are good collaborators with each other because tur dal is a nitrogen generating plant and it produces a lot of its own nitrogen, whereas cotton is a nitrogen exhaustive plant and it takes up a lot of nitrogen. So it's a good plant to have between. And also, suppose you get some kind of nasty cotton pest here, it's harder for this pest to jump through the tur dal and affect this other cotton because they don't have a lot of common pests, which is a really good way to save the cotton crop because it is probably the most pest infested crop that we grow in India. Like it accounts for some very high percentage, maybe 15 to 20% of all pesticides used over India goes to cotton. And
very clever idea. A lot of them are saying.
Yeah, and this is like really simple.
Simple,
and you can see that it's not so far away from the traditional crop, but it's not too far away from that really nice ecologically designed farm that we saw either. Like it's a little bit of a middle ground, and it's a good way to transition into more and more sustainable farming.
Certainly.
Then you can see these little yellow tags, and those are very simple traps called yellow sticky traps. And instead of spraying pesticides, they capture a lot of tiny mites and things like that that can over time cause a lot of damage. And so they also encourage the natural predators of pests, because having tur dal, which has different flowers, and cotton, which has different flowers, they attract different types of butterflies, different types of moths. And it's really great to see just how the addition of this simple two-row intercrop can bring about so many good changes. So this is an example of a really good, like a lot of practices have been followed in this farm. And so that's kind of what we do. So if you know the practices, how do you bring them to the farmers? So our goal is to use the ecosystem knowledge that we have and the knowledge of traditional and new practices. And the way we spread it is, first, you need a donor. This is the key thing to everything, sadly, is that you need to find someone who will sponsor your efforts. Then second, you choose a group of farmers to focus on. Rather than trying to focus on a lot of farmers at once, you say, okay, I'll just focus on these 30 farmers right now. And then a very important component is having a demonstration farm. So usually what we say is, we ask farmers, okay, for this season, we'll pay you X amount of money. Can you farm according to all the techniques that we are recommending? And then we bring farmers from nearby or even far away to come see how the demonstration farm is doing, because they are all in the same area, and other than the techniques, they are not getting any other advantages. And a lot of farmers themselves have discovered that these sustainable practices are most importantly saving them money, and also helping the soil to stay rejuvenated, helping the crops to stay good. So it's really having a demonstration farm is a really, really important aspect of convincing farmers to switch their way of cultivation, because it's a big leap and it's very scary to farmers, because if a lot of current productivity comes from the very intensive method of putting a lot of fertilizer and a lot of chemicals. So it's a big step for farmers to take. So we want to help them the most we can. Then the next important step is to conduct trainings, and most importantly, build capacity, so that eventually you can remove yourself from the system. You train farmers, and then you train farmers on how to train other farmers, or how to start their own smaller industries, where you say, so for example, in our programs, we have given like a lot of women farmers the startup funds to start their own vermicompost beds. So with their vermicompost beds, they market it themselves. They tell their villagers, okay, use this. I've used it in my own farm. It's great. It's helping. So this is like the idea of just training and leaving is not enough. You have to be able to continue it and move this forward.
Certainly, Chaiti. All right, we can move on. We can wrap up a little.
Almost done. Yeah. Yes. Create educational posters. And as of this date, our program has reached 1.24 lakh farmers through like using this model and growing and growing and growing. So it's a good thing. But of course, there are so many more things to be done. This is just one crop and an intermediate thing. So I hope that all of you are motivated to solve the world's problems and help us grow food and survive.